The ballroom went dead silent the moment his name was announced. Every noblewoman stepped back. Fans snapped shut, eyes dropped to the floor. No one wanted to be chosen by the Duke of Tornike. The man they whispered had made grown lords weep, the man whose cold stare had silenced entire courts. But Nestan didn't step back. She was new. She didn't know the rules yet. And before she could understand what was happening, the herald's voice rang across the marble hall. His Grace, the Duke Tornike, requests the hand of the Lady in Ivory. Every head turned, slowly, toward her. Nestan looked down at her dress. Ivory. Her heart stopped. And across the gilded floor, through a sea of frozen faces, the most feared man in the kingdom lifted his eyes to hers and smiled. Nestan had never felt more out of place in her life. The ballroom of Carthmere Palace was the kind of place that made you feel small on purpose. The ceilings stretched so high above her head that the chandeliers looked like fallen stars caught in gold wire, dripping light onto everything below. The floors were white marble veined with pale grey, so polished she could almost see her own face in them, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Her dress was borrowed, her slippers were a half size too tight, and she had spent the last 3 minutes standing near the edge of the room, pretending to study a wall painting of a dead king while slowly dying inside. She was not supposed to be here. That was the truth of it. She was the daughter of a minor lord, whose name most people in this room had never bothered to learn. Her father, Lord Irakli, had scraped together every coin and every favour he had left just to get her an invitation tonight, convinced that one evening in the right room could change everything for their family. He had kissed her forehead before she stepped into the carriage and told her to smile and stand straight and not eat too quickly at the supper table. He had looked at her the way people look at the last bet they'll ever place. She was trying. She really was. But the moment she had walked through those grand double doors and felt the weight of the room shift, something in her chest had pulled tight and stayed that way. These people had been born knowing how to move in places like this. They laughed without looking nervous. They touched each other's arms and leaned close to whisper things, and smiled with their eyes in ways that looked completely effortless. Nestan smiled with her whole face, like a person who was trying not to drown. The room smelled of candle wax and roses, and something underneath both of those things that she couldn't name, something older. The kind of smell that old stone carries when it has been holding secrets for centuries. The walls were lined with portraits of men and women in heavy frames, all of them staring out with the same expression, as if they found the living people below them faintly disappointing. She understood the feeling. The music had been playing since she arrived. A string quartet tucked into the far corner, steady and elegant, filling every silence the way water fills a crack in old wood. Couples moved across the floor in slow, practiced circles. The women were breathtaking. Gowns in deep emerald and midnight blue, and the kind of red that looks like danger from across the room. Jewels at their throats, hairpinned with what must have been the weight of small fortunes. Nestan touched the single pearl at her own neck, a gift from her mother years ago, and let her hand drop before anyone noticed. She had told herself she would find someone to talk to. That was the plan. Find someone approachable, be pleasant, make one useful connection, and consider the evening a success, a small success. The kind her father would be grateful for, even if he tried not to show it. But then the doors at the far end of the ballroom had opened, and the herald had spoken, and everything had changed. The silence that fell was not the polite quiet that sometimes moves through a room when someone important arrives. It was the kind of silence that has fear in it. She had felt it before she understood it, the way you feel a change in the weather before you see the clouds. One moment the room was alive with sound and movement, and the next everything simply stopped. The women around her had moved back without a word between them, as if pulled by the same invisible string. Fans closed. Gazes fell. Even the men, the broad-shouldered lords, who had been laughing loudly at each other's jokes only a breath before, went still and found something interesting to look at near their own shoes. Nestan had looked around, confused, and then looked forward. He walked like a man who had long ago stopped caring what a room thought of him. Not with arrogance exactly, but with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that the world tends to rearrange itself around him whether he asks for it or not. He was tall, dark-haired. His coat was black, with no ornament on it, except the single silver pin at his collar, which somehow looked more expensive than everything else in the room combined. His jaw was set. His eyes moved across the crowd with the slow, unhurried ease of a man who is used to reading rooms the way other men read maps. He was younger than she expected. She had imagined someone older, harder, the kind of man-age turns into stone. But the Duke of Tornike looked to be no more than 30, and there was something in his face that she could not quite name. Not cruelty, not exactly. Something more complicated than that. She would think about that later, after, because that was when the herald spoke, the lady in ivory. She heard it, and she didn't understand it immediately, the way you sometimes hear your own name called and take a second too long to respond because some part of you is still somewhere else. And then the word ivory landed in her mind, and she looked down, and there was her dress, pale as morning, and the understanding moved through her body like cold water. She looked up. Every single person in the room was looking at her, not with envy, not with curiosity, with something that looked a great deal like pity. The woman beside her, a beautiful, dark-eyed lady in green whose name Nestan didn't know, turned her head just slightly and said under her breath, so quietly it was barely sound at all, "Do not look afraid. Whatever you do, do not look afraid." Nestan's throat closed. She looked back across the floor. He was still watching her. The Duke of Tornike, the man every noblewoman in this room had stepped away from without needing to be asked. And he was smiling, which was somehow worse and better at the same time, because it was not the smile she had expected. It was not cold. It was not cruel. It was small and quiet and almost careful, like something he didn't take out very often, and it was pointed entirely at her. Her feet moved before she decided to move them. She wasn't sure if that was bravery or just her body refusing to embarrass her father in front of 500 people. Either way, she walked. Across that wide, silent floor, with every eye in the room following her like she was the only moving thing in the world, she walked toward him. The marble was cold under her thin slippers. The chandelier light pressed down on her shoulders like a hand. The music, she realized distantly, had stopped. The quartet had simply stopped playing, and no one had told them to. They had just felt the moment and gone quiet the way everything else had. She stopped in front of him. This close, he was even harder to read. There were lines near his eyes that hadn't been visible from across the room. His eyes themselves were dark, almost black, and they were looking at her with an attention that felt unusual, not predatory, just very, very present, like she was something he was trying to understand and had decided to take his time with. "You didn't step back," he said. His voice was low, even, not loud, but the kind of voice that doesn't need to be. Nestan held herself as still as she could manage. "I didn't know I was supposed to." Something moved across his face, not quite amusement, something quieter than that. "No." he said. "I don't imagine you did." He extended his hand. She stared at it for exactly 1 second too long. Then she placed her hand in his. The music started again, as if someone had been waiting for precisely that moment to breathe. And Nestan, daughter of a minor lord in borrowed slippers, stepped onto the floor of Carthmere Palace beside the most feared man in the kingdom, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that she still had no idea what she had just walked into. Before we go, I need to know, what did this story do to you? If this story moved you even a little, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who loves a good slow burn. Every single one of those things helps this channel reach people who need exactly this kind of story. And it genuinely means everything to me. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. His hand was warm. That was the first thing she noticed, and it surprised her enough that she almost lost her footing in the first 3 steps. She had expected cold. Everything about this man, the way the room feared him, the silence that had swallowed his entrance, the careful blankness of his face, had prepared her for cold. But his grip was steady and warm, and he held her like she was something that mattered, not something he was simply required to carry across a floor. She focused on her feet. The steps came back to her slowly, the way things learned under pressure always do. Her mother had taught her to dance in their narrow sitting room back home, counting out loud, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, with the furniture pushed against the walls and the fire going low because wood was expensive that winter. She had not thought about those lessons in years. Now they rose up in her like a language she had almost forgotten, and she was grateful. More grateful than she had ever been for anything her mother had quietly given her without making a fuss about it. The Duke moved well, better than well. He led without pulling, guided without forcing, and she realized after the first full turn that he was making it easy for her, adjusting. Not obviously, not in a way that would embarrass her in front of everyone watching, but she could feel it in the small corrections he made before she needed them, the way he shifted his weight half a beat before she would have stumbled, the way he kept her from the edge of the floor where the light was brightest and the watching eyes were thickest. She didn't know what to do with that. "You're counting," he said. She looked up at him. "I'm not. You are. In your head. Your lips move slightly." She pressed her lips together. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes did. "It's nothing to be ashamed of," he said. "I counted for the first 2 years of every event I was forced to attend. In my head, out loud once, under my breath when I was desperate." She studied him carefully. "You don't seem like someone who gets desperate." "Everyone gets desperate," he said. "Some of us are just better at looking like we don't." The music moved around them, low and sweeping, and she felt the room slowly remembering how to breathe. Other couples had returned to the floor now. The spell of absolute stillness had broken, and the ballroom was filling back in around them, voices and laughter and the soft percussion of feet on marble. But she was aware, with a sharp and constant awareness, that eyes were still on them. Not everyone, but enough. Women whispering behind their fans, men watching over the rims of their glasses with expressions she couldn't fully read. She thought about what the woman in green had said. "Do not look afraid." She wasn't afraid exactly. She wasn't sure what she was. "Why me?" she said. It came out more directly than she intended. Not a performance of boldness, just the actual question her mind had been turning over since the herald said ivory, and the world rearranged itself around her. She felt him consider it, not deflect, not laugh it off. He actually considered it. "You were the only one still standing where you were," he said. I told you. I didn't know. I know you didn't. She waited. But he didn't add anything to that, and somehow the silence said more than more words would have. She thought about all the women who had stepped back, the seamless, practiced way they had done it, without signal or instruction, as if they had rehearsed it. As if not being chosen by him was the best outcome they could hope for, and they had prepared accordingly. "They're all afraid of you," she said. "Yes. Why?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, with the full weight of those dark eyes, and she made herself hold it, even though every instinct she had told her to look away. "Because fear is easier than the alternative," he said. She turned that over in her mind. "Huh?" Before she could respond, the music shifted, slowing into something that required them to stand closer, and she felt the slight adjustment in his hold, still proper, still correct in every technical sense, but closer now, and the warmth of him was more present than before. "You're not from the capital," he said, not a question. "Is it that obvious? You looked at the ceiling when you came in." She blinked. "People from the capital don't look at the ceiling? People from the capital stopped seeing the ceiling 20 years ago. They walk in and look immediately for the faces they know and the faces they need. You walked in and looked up. She had done exactly that." She remembered it, that first overwhelming second of walking through the doors and tipping her head back, because the space above her was so enormous and so full of light that she couldn't help it. She hadn't thought anyone had seen her do it. "My father is Lord Irakli of Mutskali," she said. "We are not often invited to places like this. I know who your father is." She looked at him sharply. "You do? I make a point of knowing who is in a room before I walk into it. And yet you still chose to ask me to dance." "And yet," he agreed. There was something almost careful in the way he spoke to her. Not gentle exactly, more like deliberate, like someone who had learnt to measure every word, because words had cost him something once, and he hadn't forgotten the price. She wondered what the stories were. She had heard fragments on the carriage ride over, from Lady Tamar, a distant cousin who had arranged the invitation and spent the entire journey impressing upon Nestan that there were certain men in this court one did not engage with, did not provoke, did not look at for too long. The Duke of Tornike had been at the top of that list. His father had been a brutal man. There had been a broken engagement 3 years ago, the details of which Tamar had seemed simultaneously desperate to share and afraid to speak aloud. There had been a duel. Someone had been ruined. No one agreed on exactly who had started what. But everyone agreed that Tornike had finished it. None of that matched the man currently making sure she didn't stumble on a ballroom floor. The dance ended. The music softened and stilled, and the couples around them slowed and separated with polite applause, and Nestan realized she was not ready for it to be over. Not because of him, she told herself, but because over meant stepping back into the edges of the room and becoming nobody again. The girl in the borrowed dress standing near the wall paintings. He didn't release her hand immediately, just a breath longer than protocol required, just long enough that she noticed. And then he stepped back and inclined his head in the small, formal bow that the moment called for. "Thank you," he said. She curtsied. Her knees were steadier than she expected. "Thank you, Your Grace." He looked at her for one more second. Then he said, quietly enough that only she could hear it, "I hope you'll still be in the room after supper." And then he turned and walked away, and the crowd parted for him like water. And she stood in the middle of the ballroom floor with her heart beating very loudly and the distinct feeling that something had just begun that she did not yet have words for. Lady Tamar appeared at her side almost instantly, materializing from somewhere in the crowd, with the speed of a woman who had been watching closely and could no longer contain herself. "What did he say to you?" Tamar said. It was barely a question, more like a demand she was trying to dress up as one. Nestan thought about it. She looked across the room to where the Duke had stopped near one of the tall windows, a glass in his hand now, speaking to no one. Looking out at the dark gardens below, as if the ballroom behind him was something he was tolerating rather than attending. He said he hoped I would stay for supper, she said. Tamar made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a warning. Nestan. Her voice had dropped. Do you understand what it means that he asked you to dance? Out of every woman in this room, I understand that everyone thinks it's dangerous. It is dangerous. He is not a man who does things without reason. He does not ask for dances. He has not asked a woman to dance at a court event in 3 years, not since. She stopped, looked around, lowered her voice further. You need to be very careful. Nestan looked at her cousin. Then she looked back across the room at the Duke, still at the window, and she watched the way he stood, slightly apart from everything. The stillness of a man who was used to being the thing the room moved around rather than the thing that moved. He adjusted the dance so I wouldn't fall, she said quietly. Tamar stared at her. He knew I wasn't practiced, and he adjusted so no one would see it. The older woman was quiet for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, something complicated that Nestan couldn't fully read. That, Tamar said slowly, is exactly what makes him dangerous. Supper was served in the long hall adjacent to the ballroom, a room that managed to feel even grander than the one they had just left. The table ran the full length of it, set with more silverware than Nestan had ever seen in one place, and flowers so fresh they still smelled like they were growing. She was seated near the middle, which was neither an honour nor an insult, just the anonymous middle ground where minor nobility was quietly deposited and expected to be grateful for the food. She was grateful. She was also distracted. He was seated near the top of the table, far enough away that she could not hear his voice, close enough that she could see him clearly if she looked in that direction, which she was trying very hard not to do too often. He ate sparingly and spoke rarely, and the people around him, the high lords and their carefully dressed wives, kept a perceptible amount of space around him even at a seated table, as if proximity itself carried some kind of risk. Lady Tamar was beside her, working through her soup with the focused energy of a woman who had said her piece and was now watching to see what would come of it. On Nestan's other side was a young lord named Georgi Darajanidze, who had introduced himself twice, which told her he was either nervous or had already had too much wine, and was now telling her about his family's estates in the northern valley with an enthusiasm that suggested he found them more interesting than she did. She smiled and nodded and watched the Duke from the corner of her eye, and then she noticed the woman. She was seated 3 chairs to the Duke's right, which was close enough to be deliberate. She was striking in the way that women in portraits are striking, the kind of beauty that looks curated rather than accidental. Dark hair piled high, a gown the colour of deep water, a long, pale neck circled by sapphires that caught the candlelight with every small movement she made. She was watching the Duke the way a person watches something they believe still belongs to them. Lady Salome Mdivani. Tamar leaned close and said the name under her breath before Nestan had to ask, which meant Tamar had been watching her watch. She was the engagement, Tamar said. Just that. Just the 3 words. The broken engagement, 3 years ago. The one Tamar had started to tell her about in the carriage, and then thought better of. Nestan looked at her soup. She married Lord Archil Mdivani 8 months after the engagement ended. Tamar continued quietly, as if she was recounting something from a history book rather than the recent lives of people sitting 20 feet away. No one fully knows what happened between her and Tornike. What everyone does know is that she has spent the last 3 years making sure the court remembers that she chose to end it. Did she? Tamar was quiet for just a beat too long. That is what she says. Nestan looked up from her soup and found, without meaning to, that the Duke had turned his head slightly in her direction. Not looking at her, looking just past her, at nothing specific, the way people sometimes look when they are thinking rather than seeing. But the angle of it meant that for 1 second their eyes nearly met, and she felt the almost contact of it somewhere in her chest before she looked deliberately away. Across the table and 2 seats down, Lady Salome was watching her now. It was not a friendly look. It was the particular look of a woman who has decided to assess a potential problem and is not yet sure how seriously to take it. Nestan held it for exactly as long as was polite, and then returned her attention to her plate. Her appetite had left her somewhere between the soup and the fish course. She made it through supper by keeping her face pleasant and her answers to Georgi Darajanidze short, but warm enough not to be rude. It took more effort than it should have. There was a tension in the room that she could feel but not locate precisely, like a sound just below the range of hearing. Something was happening in the social currents of this gathering that she didn't have enough context to read, and the not knowing was worse than anything specific would have been. After supper came the part of the evening that was not quite dancing and not quite mingling, but somewhere in between. The doors between the long hall and the ballroom were opened, and people moved through them in loose groups, refreshed and warmed by food and wine, and ready to perform at one another again. Nestan moved with the current of it, and found herself near the tall windows on the garden side of the ballroom, far from the musicians, where the noise of the room faded to something manageable. She hadn't been standing there long when she heard her name. Not her full name, just Nestan, said quietly and with the careful enunciation of someone who had learnt it recently and was making sure to get it right. She turned. Lady Salome Mdivani was standing a few feet away, close enough for a private conversation, far enough to make it deniable. Her expression was composed. Pleasantly composed. The kind of pleasant that is constructed rather than felt. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said. Her voice was smooth, modulated. "I'm told you danced with the Duke this evening." "I did," Nestan said. Salome looked at her with that same assessing quality, more direct now that they were close. "You're Lord Irakli's daughter." "From Mtskali." "Yes. Your father serves on the Provincial Trade Council, doesn't he?" It was phrased like a question, but it wasn't. She knew the answer. She had looked, or had someone look, which amounted to the same thing, a quick private accounting of who Nestan was and what she was worth in the currency this court ran on. "He does," Nestan said, and kept her voice even. Salome smiled. It was a beautiful smile. "I only mention it because I think it's important that someone tells you this kindly, and I find that kind people are sometimes in short supply at these events." She paused, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her glove. "The Duke dances with someone at nearly every gathering. Someone new, someone who doesn't yet know to step back. He chooses carefully, always someone without enough standing to cause him difficulty, and by the following week the whole affair is entirely forgotten." Another pause. "I would hate for you to mistake a single dance for something it isn't." Nestan looked at her steadily. The words were designed to land like concern. They landed like a warning, and both of them knew it. "That's very thoughtful of you," Nestan said. Something flickered in Salome's eyes. She had expected something else. Gratitude, perhaps, or visible injury. Nestan gave her neither. "I just think," Salome continued, and the smoothness in her voice had pulled slightly tighter, "that a girl in your position could do herself a great deal of harm by misreading a situation like this. The court has a long memory." "So do I," Nestan said pleasantly. The silence between them stretched for one measured second. Then Salome smiled again, broader this time, and inclined her head in a small, elegant dismissal. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," she said, and walked away with the unhurried grace of a woman who has decided she will deal with something later rather than now. Nestan let out a slow breath. Her hands, she noticed, were perfectly still at her sides. She was grateful for that. Inside, she was considerably less still. Her heart was moving faster than the situation strictly required, and she was aware of a low, steady anger underneath the composure she had managed to hold on to. An anger not at the words themselves, but at the particular kind of cruelty that dresses itself up as helpfulness. She turned back toward the window and looked out at the dark gardens below. Lanterns strung along the paths, throwing small circles of orange light onto the gravel, and she made herself breathe. She was so focused on breathing that she didn't hear him approach. "You're still here," the Duke said. She turned. He was standing just behind her right shoulder, close enough to speak quietly, and he had a glass in each hand. He extended one to her without ceremony, as if this was something they had done before, as if they were two people who had a habit of meeting at windows. She took it. "You said you hoped I would be." "I did." He looked past her at the gardens. "I also didn't expect you to actually be." She studied his profile. In the dimmer light, away from the chandeliers, he looked different. Still unreadable, but the blankness she had seen when he walked in was gone. There was something more present in its place. Something that looked quietly and almost reluctantly like relief. "Lady Salome introduced herself to me," Nestan said. He was very still for a moment. "Did she?" "She wanted to make sure I understood that you do this regularly. Choose someone without enough standing to cause you difficulty. Forget them the following week." He turned his head and looked at her fully. The dark eyes again, that very present attention. "And do you believe her?" he said. Nestan considered it honestly. She thought about the way he had moved through the dance, the small, deliberate adjustments, the careful invisibility of his consideration for her. She thought about the way he was standing here now, with his second glass of wine and no performance of casualness, just actual stillness, actual presence. "I don't know you well enough to know what to believe," she said. "That's fair. But I know what she wanted me to do when she said it." "What was that?" "Leave." He looked at her. Outside, one of the lanterns in the garden below guttered in the wind and went out, and the small absence of its light made the night look darker than it had before. "And yet," he said softly. She turned back to the window. Her reflection looked back at her from the dark glass, pale and composed and not entirely sure of itself. "And yet," she agreed. They stood at the window long enough that it stopped being accidental. That was the thing about standing somewhere with someone. There was a point at which it shifted from coincidence to choice, and they had passed that point several minutes ago without either of them moving to change it. The ballroom continued behind them, full of its noise and its light and its careful performances, and they stood with their backs to all of it and looked at the dark gardens below as if the lanterns and the gravel paths were something worth studying. He spoke first. "My father used to host these evenings," he said, not loudly, not with any particular weight, just the way people sometimes begin things with a fact that is also a door. "I spent most of my childhood in rooms exactly like this one, standing exactly where I'm standing now, as far from the center as I could get without being noticed." She looked at him. "They didn't notice?" "My father noticed everything. He just preferred I stay out of the way." A pause. "It was an arrangement that suited us both for a time. She heard what was underneath that. Not the words themselves, but the shape of them, the particular flatness that comes when someone has long since finished grieving something, and what's left is just the fact of it, worn smooth by years of being carried. "My mother taught me to dance in our sitting room," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out because he had offered something real, and she understood instinctively that the only right response to that was something equally real. "We pushed the furniture back," she counted out loud. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We didn't have the money for proper lessons, and she didn't want me to arrive somewhere like this and not know the steps. He was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like someone who thought ahead." She was. Nestan looked down at the glass in her hand. "She died 4 years ago. I'm sorry." It was simply said. No performance of condolence, none of the elaborate "sorry for your loss" that people produce in formal settings like a required document. Just 2 words, direct and genuine, and she felt them land somewhere tender. "The pearl," he said. She touched her neck before she thought about it. "I noticed it when you walked in," he said. "It doesn't match anything else in the room. But you keep touching it." She lowered her hand. She felt for a strange second entirely seen, and it was not a comfortable feeling, and also not an unwelcome one. Both of those things at the same time, in a way she didn't have a clean word for. "It was hers," she said. He nodded once and said nothing more about it, which was exactly right. The music had shifted again, something slower now, and the sound of it drifted across the room and settled around them like weather. She was aware of how close they were standing. Not improperly close, but close enough that she could see the silver pin at his collar in detail. A small running horse, she realized now. Not abstract ornamentation, but a specific thing. Chosen. "The horse," she said. He glanced down at it. Something in his face changed very slightly. A brief softening, gone almost before it arrived. "My mother's," he said. She looked at him. He looked at the gardens. They stood with their respective dead between them, and it felt, unexpectedly, like the most honest conversation she had had in years. Then the night cracked open and everything changed. She heard the voice before she located its source, raised above the general hum of the room with the particular carrying quality of someone who is not trying to be quiet. She turned and found it. Lord Archil Medivany, Lady Salome's husband, a broad man with a red face and the confident posture of someone who had drunk just enough to feel invincible. He was standing 20 feet away, with a small group of men around him, and he was looking directly at her and the Duke, and he was smiling the kind of smile that is actually a weapon. "Tornike," he said, loudly enough that the nearest quarter of the room heard it and the rest felt the shift. "I see you found yourself another provincial distraction." The group around him went very still. The kind of still that means they knew what he was doing and had decided to watch rather than intervene. Across the room she could see Tamar's face, tight with alarm. She felt the Duke go still beside her. Not the stillness of surprise, the other kind, the kind that is controlled. "Careful," he said. His voice was low and completely even. Archil laughed. It was not a warm sound. "I'm only making conversation. The lady is lovely, isn't she? They usually are, the ones you choose. Young, impressionable. No connections worth worrying about." His eyes moved to Nestan with something in them that made her want to step back, though she didn't. "Enjoy the evening, girl. He'll have forgotten your name by Tuesday." The room was listening now, not obviously. People were not turning and staring, but the conversations nearest to them had gone thin and quiet, and she could feel attention moving toward them the way heat moves toward an open door. She understood what was happening. This was not a drunk man making careless remarks. This was a message, delivered in public and in company, designed to land where it would do the most visible damage. To her, to remind the room she was nobody. To the Duke, to remind the room that Archil Medivani was not afraid of him. She did not look at the Duke. She looked at Archil. "My name is Nestan Iraklides," she said, clearly and without heat. "And I'm quite capable of managing my own evening, thank you." Something flickered across Archil's face. He hadn't expected her to speak. They never did, she suspected, the ones men like him chose to use as instruments. "She has a voice," he said to the men beside him, still smiling. But the smile had changed quality slightly. "She does," the Duke said. There was nothing loud in it, nothing theatrical. Just those two words in that low, even voice, and something in them closed the space for further comment as completely as a door being shut. Archil looked at him for a long moment, and whatever he found in the Duke's expression was enough to make the smile fade by several degrees. The group shifted. Someone said something about getting more wine. The moment dispersed the way these moments do, not resolved but abandoned, which was a different thing. Nestan became aware that her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from the specific physical aftermath of having held herself completely still, while every instinct in her body was doing something else. "Come," the Duke said quietly, and began to move along the edge of the room, away from the centre, away from the cluster where Archil was still standing. She moved with him, not because she was following him exactly, but because the direction he was moving was the right direction, and she knew it. He led her through a side door she hadn't noticed, into a short corridor that ran along the outside of the ballroom. It was cooler there, and quieter. The music reduced to something felt more than heard, and the air didn't have the weight of 500 people in it. She breathed. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. "It wasn't your fault." "No, but it was because of me." He looked at the middle distance, jaw set. "Archil Medivani has been waiting for an opportunity to do something like that for some time. I gave him one tonight." She thought about what Tamar had said, the broken engagement, the duel. Someone ruined. She thought about Salome's careful, beautiful face and the way she had watched the Duke from 3 seats down with eyes that were something other than indifferent. "What happened?" she said. "Between you and Salome." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "She told the court that I ended it," he said finally, "because I was unstable. Because my father's cruelty had made me unfit for marriage and dangerous to be near." He said it plainly, the way you say something you have had years to make peace with and haven't entirely. It was a useful story. It protected her reputation and gave the court a reason for the end of the engagement that didn't require them to ask too many questions. "And the truth?" He looked at her directly. "The truth is that I ended it, but not for the reasons she gave. I ended it because I found out what she had agreed to. There are men in this court, powerful men, who wanted access to certain information that my family holds. She had agreed to provide that access. Through me, through our marriage." A pause. "She didn't know I had found out. I didn't tell her. I simply ended it, and she chose the story that suited her best." Nestan stood with that for a moment. The corridor was cold, and the music was a distant murmur, and she was looking at a man who had been called dangerous and unstable for 3 years in place of the truth. "And Archil," she said, "is one of the men she went to instead." His voice was flat. "They have been useful to each other." She understood now. The full shape of it. Not just a bitter woman at a supper table and a loud husband with too much wine. A 3-year campaign, patient and social and almost invisible, designed to keep the Duke exactly where he was, isolated, feared, dismissed, so that he could not move against them without it looking like the behaviour of an unstable man. "They're afraid of you," she said slowly. "Yes, not the way the others are afraid. Not just reputation. No," he looked at her. "Not just reputation." She thought about what it meant that she knew this now. What it meant that he had told her, here, in a cold corridor, away from the room. She thought about Tamar's face when she came back inside. She thought about her father and the carriage and the last bet he would ever place. The stakes had just become something entirely different than they had been an hour ago. "They saw you talking to me tonight," she said. "Yes. And then they saw you follow me out of the room." "Yes." She let the silence hold for a moment. "Then they're going to think I'm important to you." He looked at her steadily. "Yes." She felt the weight of it settle. Not the weight of fear exactly, though that was part of it. The weight of consequence. Of having walked into the centre of something without knowing there was a centre, and now knowing, and now having to decide what to do with the knowing. "I think," she said carefully, "that you should have chosen someone with less to lose." He was quiet for a moment, and then, quietly enough that she almost didn't catch it, he said, "I'm beginning to think I chose exactly right. She should have gone back inside." That was the sensible thing. Go back inside, find Tamar, smile at the right people, and spend the rest of the evening being exactly what she had come here to be. A minor lord's daughter, making small, careful connections before the carriage took her home. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. She went back inside. But something had shifted in the architecture of the evening, and she could feel it in the way the room received her when she walked back through the side door. It was subtle. The kind of subtle that only exists in rooms like this one, where every social signal is a language people have been speaking since birth. A glance held a half-second too long. A conversation that paused as she passed and resumed when she was 2 steps beyond it. A woman she didn't know smiling at her with the particular warmth reserved for people who have suddenly become interesting. She had been in the room for 3 hours, and she had gone from nobody to something else entirely. And she hadn't done anything except stand at a window and refuse to leave. Tamar found her near the dessert table and took her arm with a grip that was gentle in form and urgent in substance. "Tell me what happened in the corridor," Tamar said under her breath. "We talked." "Nestan." "We talked, Tamar. That's all." Tamar looked at her with the eyes of a woman who had been navigating this court for 20 years and could read a situation the way other people read words. Half the room saw him follow you out. The other half heard about it from the half that saw. Do you understand what that means in a room like this? It means people are going to talk. It means Archil Medivani is going to do more than talk. She released her arm but stayed close, her voice dropping further. "He came to find me after you left the room. He was pleasant about it, which was worse than if he hadn't been. He asked about your father's position on the Trade Council. He asked how long the appointment ran. He mentioned that appointments like that are reviewed periodically, and that the review board responds well to recommendations from certain members of the High Court." Nestan went still. He didn't say anything threatening directly. Tamar continued. He didn't have to. That's how men like him work. They hand you the shape of the thing and let you fill in the substance yourself. Her father's face came to her. The carriage door, the forehead kiss, the way he had looked at her like she was the last good thing he had left to try. She set down the small plate she had been holding without having eaten anything from it. "Where is he now?" she said. "Archil." Tamar tilted her head almost imperceptibly toward the far side of the room, near the second set of doors. Archil was there, still with his group of men, but he had been joined now by two others she didn't recognize, older, better dressed, with the particular stillness of men who hold the kind of power that doesn't need to make noise about itself. She watched them for a moment. One of the older men said something, and Archil laughed, and the laugh had a shape to it that she recognized from the earlier confrontation. Satisfied, anticipatory, they were not done for the evening. She turned to look for the Duke and found him without difficulty, because the room always knew where he was, even when it was pretending not to. He was near the far window again, this time with a white-haired lord she didn't recognize, listening more than speaking, his face set back into the unreadable blankness he had worn when he first walked in. Whatever ease had existed between them in the corridor was invisible now. He had put himself back together for the room, and the room was none the wiser. She wondered if he knew what Archil had said to Tamar. She suspected he would not be surprised. She was deciding whether to move toward him when the evening made the decision for her. The white-haired lord beside the Duke raised his voice, not dramatically, just enough, the practiced elevation of a man who is accustomed to being listened to without having to ask for it. The room quieted by degrees, the way it does when someone significant signals that they have something to say. "I think," the Lord said, and he was smiling the way people smile when they have timed something carefully, "that we owe our host a toast, and perhaps a small acknowledgement of the evening's more memorable moments." There was a ripple of amusement through the crowd. Glasses were lifted. Someone called out an agreement. "To Carthmere," the Lord said, raising his own glass, "and to the Duke, who has given us considerably more to discuss this evening than we expected." The laughter that followed was knowing, pointed, the kind of laughter that is also a comment. She saw it happen, the almost imperceptible tightening along the Duke's jaw, the way his hand adjusted its grip on his glass by a fraction. Nobody else would have caught it. She caught it because she had been watching his face long enough tonight to know what it looked like when something landed. They were doing it publicly now. What Archil had started at supper, this older lord, was finishing with a smile and a toast, and 500 people laughing along because it was easier than not laughing. They were making the evening into a story, and in the story the Duke was the subject of amusement, and she was the punchline. Something moved through her that was cleaner and hotter than anger. She didn't plan what she did next. She would think about that later, the absence of a plan, and she would not be sure whether it had been brave or simply impulsive, and she would decide in the end that there was not always a meaningful difference. She stepped forward, not toward the Duke, toward the white-haired lord, into the open space near the window where the toast had been made, where the laughter was still settling, and she stepped into it with her glass raised and her voice steady. "I'd like to add to that toast," she said. The room turned. She felt it turn, the full weight of 500 people's attention, and she held herself inside it without letting her knees do what they wanted to do. The white-haired lord looked at her with an expression that was too controlled to be fully readable, but contained, somewhere at its edges, surprise. "The lady in ivory," someone said nearby, and it rippled out, not unkindly, and the room settled into a curious quiet. She looked at no one in particular, and everyone at once. "To Carthmere," she said, "and to the Duke, who has more grace in how he treats a stranger than most men in this room have managed, with people they've known their entire lives." The silence that followed was a different quality from the one before it. Not laughter, not the anticipatory hum of a crowd waiting to be entertained. Something more uncertain, more alive. She turned her head and found the Duke's eyes across the room. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, not the careful quiet of the corridor, not the blankness of the public room, something more unguarded than either, something that lasted only a second before he controlled it, but she saw it. And it was the look of a person who has been defended by someone they did not expect to defend them and does not quite know what to do with the feeling. She drank from her glass. Around her, slowly, others raised theirs. Not everyone, not the group near Arkil, who had gone very still, but enough. Enough that the moment tipped in a direction that could not be entirely retaken. Tamar appeared beside her as the room exhaled back into noise. Her expression was the strangest mixture of alarm and something that was almost pride. "That was either the bravest thing I have ever seen," she said very quietly, "or the most catastrophic." "I know," Nestan said. "Archil is going to—" "I know, Tamar." She did know. She had known the moment the words left her mouth, and she had said them anyway, and she was still holding her glass, and her hand was completely steady, which surprised her. The hot, clean feeling had not gone. It was still there, settled somewhere in her chest like something finally said. She looked across the room. Archil was watching her with an expression that had shed all its pleasantness. The older lord beside him had his head bent, listening to something Archil was saying, and his eyes were on her too now. Then the Duke was beside her. She hadn't seen him move. One moment he was across the room, and then he was simply there, close enough that his shoulder was near hers, standing the way he had stood at the window, slightly between her and the room, not shielding her in any obvious way, but present in the way that presence can be a statement. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. It's going to cause you difficulty." "More difficulty than my father's appointment being threatened?" She looked at him. "They were already going to come for me. I decided I would at least have a reason." He looked at her for a long moment. Something was working in his expression, something that looked like the internal adjustment a person makes when their understanding of a situation changes and they have to catch up to the new version of it. "Your father's appointment," he said slowly. "Archil mentioned it to my cousin after we left the room. The review board, the recommendations." She watched his face. "You knew they would do something like that." "I knew they would do something." His voice was quiet and completely direct. "I didn't know it would be that fast." "Would you have told me?" The question sat between them. He didn't look away from it. "Yes," he said, "I would have told you." She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why, given how little she knew him and how much of the evening had been demonstration that this world ran on performance and calculation. But she believed him the way you sometimes believe a thing that you feel in your body before your mind has finished deciding. "Then tell me now," she said. "All of it. Whatever I've walked into tonight, I want to know the full shape of it." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he said, quietly and without hesitation, "Not here." "Then when?" "Tomorrow, if you're willing." She thought about her father. She thought about her mother's pearl, and the borrowed dress, and the half-sized too small slippers that had been hurting her feet since the second hour of the evening. She thought about the white-haired lord's smile, and Archil's satisfied laugh, and Salome's beautiful, constructed face. She thought about the way the Duke had adjusted the dance so no one could see she didn't know the steps. "Tomorrow," she said. The carriage home felt smaller than it had on the way there. Tamar sat across from her in the dark, not speaking, which was unusual enough that Nestan noticed it immediately. Tamar was a woman who processed things aloud. Silence from her meant the thing was too large for immediate words, and the fact that it was too large for Tamar's words meant it was large indeed. Outside the window, the city moved past in pieces. Lanterns. Dark stone. A dog sitting at the edge of a fountain looking at nothing. the sound of wheels on cobblestone filling the carriage the way water fills a held breath. Nestan watched it all, and felt the evening settle into her bones the way cold does after you've been outside too long. Not painfully, just the awareness of it, the weight of what had happened, and what she had done, and what she had agreed to, spreading through her quietly and evenly like something that intended to stay. "Say it," she said finally. Tamar looked at her. "Which part? Whichever part is making you this quiet." Her cousin was still for a moment. Then she said, "When you stepped forward tonight, when you raised your glass," she stopped. "Your mother would have done exactly that." Nestan looked at her. "I mean it," Tamar said, "the exact same way, that particular quality of not having planned it and not being sorry." She turned to look out her own window. "It terrified me, and I was proud of you at the same time. That's a very uncomfortable combination." Nestan looked back at her own window. The city continued past. "I told him I'd meet him tomorrow," she said. Tamar closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "I know. He's going to tell me what I've walked into. You've walked into a decade-long power arrangement between men who destroy quietly and efficiently, and do not like being inconvenienced." Tamar's voice was even, exhausted. "I can tell you that much myself, and save you the meeting." "You could, but you don't know all of it." "No," Tamar said. "I don't know all of it." They rode in silence for another minute. The carriage swayed gently on a turn, and Nestan braced against the door without thinking about it, the automatic adjustment of a body that knows the roads. "Is he a good man?" she said. She hadn't meant to say it exactly that way. It came out younger than she intended, more direct, the kind of question that strips away context and asks for just the thing itself. Tamar considered it seriously. She didn't deflect or qualify immediately, which Nestan appreciated. "I think," Tamar said slowly, "that he is a man who has been very badly treated by people who found it useful to make him appear otherwise. Whether that makes him good, I genuinely cannot tell you." She paused. "I can tell you that in 15 years of watching this court, I have never seen him be cruel to someone who did not earn it. I have also never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you tonight when you raised that glass." "How did he look at me?" Tamar turned from the window and met her eyes directly. "Like you were something he had stopped believing in." The carriage pulled up to the house, and they climbed down into the cool night air and went inside. And Nestan went to bed without eating anything and lay in the dark for a long time, looking at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around her. Old wood and old stone doing what old things do in the quiet. She did not sleep for several hours. When she did, she dreamed of the ballroom, empty this time. All the lights still on, all the flowers still in their vases, the table still set for supper, but no one there. Just the music playing to no one, steady and unhurried, and somewhere at the edge of it, a door standing open onto a garden she couldn't quite see. She woke before the house did, in the grey early light, and lay still for a moment with the dream still close, and then she got up. Her father was in the small study off the hallway when she came downstairs, already at his desk, though the sun was barely up, bent over a column of figures with his reading glasses pushed to the end of his nose. He was older than she usually let herself see. She had a habit of looking at him with the eyes of her childhood, seeing the version of him that had seemed large and certain, and entirely capable of managing whatever the world produced. Mornings like this one made it harder to sustain that version. In the early light, he looked tired. He looked like a man doing the maths of an increasingly difficult situation and not liking the totals. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." He took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "How was last evening?" She came and sat in the chair across from his desk, the one she had sat in as a child when she'd been in trouble, or when she'd had something to tell him that required sitting down. He noticed the choice of chair and looked at her with the particular alertness of a father who knows his child. "I danced with the Duke of Tornike," she said. He was very still for a moment. "Tornike? Yes. The Duke. There is only one." He set his glasses down on the desk. "And," she told him, "not everything. Not the corridor or what the Duke had told her about Salome and the information and the 3 years of careful social destruction. That was not hers to give him yet. But she told him about the dance, and about Archil at supper, and about the toast, and about what Archil had said to Tamar afterward, about the trade council appointment and the review board. Her father listened without interrupting. He was good at that, had always been good at that, the capacity to sit completely still with incoming information and not react until he had all of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking at his hands flat on the desk in front of him. "This man Archil," he said. He mentioned the appointment directly. Not directly. He gave Tamar the shape of it, which is worse. Her father was quiet again. Then he said, "And the Duke. What does he want from you?" "He wants to meet today. To tell me what I've walked into. To tell you." Her father's voice was carefully measured. "Or to involve you further. I think those might be the same thing." He looked up at her. There was something in his face she didn't see often, something past tiredness, closer to the particular sorrow of a parent who understands that their child has crossed into a territory where they cannot follow and cannot protect them. "Nestan," he said. "These men. I know. Your mother would have done the same thing you did last night. She would have raised that glass and said exactly that, and come home and not been sorry." His voice was even, but the evenness was effortful. It cost her sometimes. Doing things like that cost her. "I know it did, and you're going to go anyway." She looked at him. "Someone has already threatened your appointment, Papa. Staying home doesn't undo that." He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, a bird started up somewhere in the garden, and the light was strengthening from grey to pale gold, and the house around them was beginning to stir with small sounds. "Be careful," he said finally. It came out simply, not as instruction, as the distilled remainder of everything else he wanted to say and couldn't. She nodded. "I will." She dressed with more care than usual, which she noticed, and didn't apologize to herself for. Not the ivory dress. That was an evening dress, and it was daylight. Something plain and well-fitted, in a deep green, that her mother had always said suited her. The pearl at her throat. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the bedroom wall and thought about what Tamar had said in the carriage and looked away before she sat with it too long. The Duke had sent word early, as she had half expected he would. Not a letter. She had asked Tamar to communicate through Tamar's own household connection to the Duke's staff, and Tamar had done it without comment, which was its own form of support. The message that came back was short. The hour, the address, the words, and come alone, in a tone that was request rather than instruction, which she noticed. The address was not the palace. It was a house in the older part of the city, the part that predated the court's expansion by 100 years, where the buildings were closer together and the streets ran narrow. She arrived in a plain carriage, without Tamar, as asked. The house was quieter than she expected, stone-fronted, old. A housekeeper let her in without ceremony and led her through a hallway lined with books to a room at the back of the house that looked out over a walled garden. The Duke was already there, standing near the window as he seemed always to stand near windows, with his back to the door and his attention on something outside. He turned when she came in. He looked different in daylight, not softer exactly, but more present. The controlled public blankness was entirely gone, and what was underneath it was quieter and more complicated. A face that had been through something and hadn't finished deciding how it felt about all of it. "You came," he said. "I said I would." He nodded. He gestured to the chairs near the fireplace, which was low but lit, and they sat across from each other with the small fire between them and the garden visible through the glass behind him, bare-branched in the late-season light. "I'll tell you everything," he said, "and then you decide what you want to do. Whatever you decide, I'll accept it, and I'll make sure Archil understands that you are no longer relevant to whatever is between him and me." She held that for a moment. "You can do that. If you step back completely and permanently, yes." He paused. "I want you to understand that option genuinely exists. I'm not telling you the cost and then explaining it away. You can walk out of this today, and I will manage the rest of it without you." She looked at him steadily. "And if I don't walk out?" Something moved in his expression. "Then I need someone I can trust in a room I can't be in. And I think that person might be you." The fire shifted quietly between them. Outside, the garden was still and grey, and full of the particular patience of things that are waiting for a season to change. She thought about her father at his desk in the early light. She thought about her mother counting 1, 2, 3 in a room with the furniture pushed back. She thought about ivory and chandeliers and a room full of people stepping away. "Tell me everything," she said. And he did. He told her about the documents first. His family had held them for 30 years, a collection of records detailing the financial arrangements between certain High Court members and a foreign trade syndicate that had been operating inside the kingdom's borders without sanction, siphoning money through legitimate merchant houses and funneling it back out through channels that were technically invisible but entirely illegal. His father had gathered the records not out of principle but out of habit, the habit of a man who collected leverage the way others collected land. And he had kept them the way all dangerous things are kept, somewhere close and somewhere secret, and somewhere only one other person knew about. That other person was the Duke. When his father died, the records became his. And the men whose names were in those records, Archil among them, the older lord from the Toast, 3 others she hadn't known to look for, had spent the 3 years since working quietly and consistently to discredit him before he could decide to use what he had. Hence Salome's story, hence the reputation, hence the careful social architecture of a man who is feared and dismissed in equal measure, because a feared and dismissed man's word carries no weight, and a man whose word carries no weight cannot harm you with a document, no matter what it contains. It was elegant, she thought, in the way that very cruel things are sometimes elegant. She sat with it after he finished. The fire had dropped lower. The garden outside was the same grey patience it had been an hour ago. He was watching her with that direct, waiting quality, not pressing, just present, giving her the full space of the silence. "Where are the records now?" she said. "Safe." "Not in this house." "They don't know where." "No. That's the one thing they haven't been able to find out." He paused. "It's also why they haven't moved past social damage into something more direct. They're not certain what happens to the records if something happens to me. What does happen to them? They go to 3 separate people simultaneously. People outside this court, outside this city, outside the reach of anyone in that room last night." She nodded slowly. It was well constructed. A dead man's hand, held open as long as he was standing. She thought about the 3 years of it, the patience required to hold something that damaging and not use it, to absorb the reputation and the isolation and the public diminishment without moving. "Why haven't you used them?" she said. "You've had 3 years. Because using them in the wrong way, through the wrong channels, with the wrong preparation, doesn't destroy them. It just warns them. And warned men with money and connections don't get destroyed, they get reorganized." His voice was level. "I've been waiting for the right moment and the right approach, and now there's a hearing in 3 weeks. The annual Trade Council review, which is normally a formality, but this year one of the review board members is a man named Lord Daviti Kvaratskelia. He's not one of theirs. He came up through a different faction entirely, and he has been looking for grounds to open a formal investigation into the syndicate for 2 years, without enough to justify it. He looked at her directly. If the records reach him through the right hands, in the right context, before the hearing, he can call for an independent inquiry. That process, once started, cannot be quietly stopped. It's too formal, too visible. Even their connections can't dissolve it without drawing the exact kind of attention they've spent 3 years avoiding. She understood. And the right hands are not mine. Mine are the last hands they should come from. A man with my reputation walking into a hearing with documents damaging to his known enemies is not a whistleblower. He's a grudge. He paused. They need to come from someone credible, someone with no visible stake in the outcome, someone they haven't had 3 years to discredit. The fire shifted. She looked at him. "Me," she said. "Your father sits on the Provincial Trade Council. That gives you legitimate standing at a review hearing. You have no known connection to me before last night. You have no reputation to weaponize." He held her gaze. "I know what I'm asking. Do you? I'm asking you to carry something dangerous into a room full of men who will immediately understand what it means and who will not be pleased. I'm asking you to do it as someone with no protection and no experience in how these things unfold." He didn't soften it. "I'm asking you because you are the only person I have encountered in 3 years who walked into the center of this without flinching and didn't walk back out when you had every reason to." She was quiet for a long moment. She thought about last night, about standing in that corridor in the cold and feeling the stakes change shape around her. She had felt it happen the moment the situation became something larger than a ballroom and a dance and a borrowed dress. She had felt it, and she had said tomorrow, and she had meant it, and now tomorrow was here, and so was everything tomorrow contained. "If I do this," she said, "and it goes wrong, your father's appointment is already threatened. If you do nothing, they'll use it regardless, because leaving a loose end is not how they operate." His voice was flat and honest. "I won't tell you the risk disappears. But if it goes right, the appointment becomes irrelevant. The men threatening it will have considerably more pressing matters to manage." She stood up. Not away from him, not toward the door. Just upright, because she needed the full height of herself for the next part. "I'll need to know everything about Kvaratskelia. How he operates, what he responds to, what approach won't put him on the defensive before I've said anything useful." She looked at the Duke. "And I'll need the records in a form I can carry without it being obvious what I'm carrying." He rose slowly. "You're sure?" "I was sure before I sat down. She said. "I just needed to hear all of it first." Something moved through his expression. That same thing she had seen last night when she raised her glass. the unguarded fraction of a second before the control came back, except this time it lasted longer. This time he let it stay. "Nestan," he said. Just her name, said the way he had said it last night when he'd learned it, and used it carefully, making sure of it, but different now. The same care with more weight behind it. She looked at him and waited. "Whatever happens after the hearing," he said slowly, as if he was feeling the shape of each word before he committed to it. "I want you to know that last night was not what Salome said it was. The dance." He held her eyes. "It was not a pattern. You were not a convenience. I don't entirely know what you are yet, but I know it's not that." She held the words, turned them over, felt the particular quality of them. They were not polished. They were not the words of a man who had practiced this, or who was performing at her. They were the words of someone saying a true thing in the plainest way he could find, which in her experience was the rarest and most valuable kind. "I know," she said quietly. 3 weeks moved differently than ordinary time. She met with the Duke 4 more times, always in the house with the walled garden, always in the room with the low fire and the books visible through the hallway. Each time they work through the detail of it, the structure of the hearing, the particular language that would land well with Kvaratskhelia, the order in which the records should be presented, the responses she might face, and how to hold herself inside them. He was thorough and direct, and he never once treated her like someone who needed the difficult parts softened. She found she learned him in pieces. The way he took his tea without anything in it. The habit he had of going completely still when he was thinking, like a man who had learned stillness as a child and never unlearnt it. The way he occasionally almost smiled and then didn't, and the way, as the weeks went on, the almost became more frequent and the didn't became less certain. She did not let herself think too far ahead. There was enough in the present to occupy her entirely. The morning of the hearing came grey and cold and still. She dressed in the dark green again, the pearl at her throat, and she sat with her father at breakfast, and he looked at her across the table with the eyes of a man who knows something is happening that he cannot be part of and has made his peace with it. "Come home safe," he said. "I will," she said. The council chamber was in the older wing of the civic building, a high-ceilinged room with long windows and the smell of old paper that reminded her, absurdly, of the ballroom. The formality of it was different. No chandeliers, no flowers. Wooden chairs and a long table at the front where the review board sat, and rows of seating behind for those withstanding to attend. She found her seat. She kept her face still and her hands in her lap, and she did not look for Archil, though she knew he was there. She could feel the awareness of him somewhere to her left, the way you feel whether Lord Daviti Kvaratskhelia was smaller than she had imagined. A compact man with careful eyes and the expression of someone who has spent a long time waiting for something and has not allowed the waiting to make him impatient. She had been told he was thorough. She had been told he was incorruptible, not out of virtue exactly, but out of the specific pride of a man who has decided that his record is the only thing that will outlast him, and he intends to protect it. When the procedural portion of the hearing moved into open submissions, she stood. She felt the room change. She felt Archil's awareness of her sharpen into something that had heat in it. She kept her eyes on Kvaratskhelia, and she spoke clearly and without rushing, and she placed the records on the table in front of the board with both hands, steadily, and she said what they were and where they had come from, and why they were relevant to the inquiry he had been attempting to open for 2 years. The room was very quiet. Kvaratskhelia looked at the records. He looked at her. He looked at the records again, with the expression of a man who has just been handed exactly what he needed, and is making absolutely sure he is understanding it correctly before he allows himself to respond. "These are verified," he said. "Not a question, but a confirmation request." "They are," she said. "I can provide the verification chain." He nodded once, slowly. Behind her, she heard Archil move. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the board and her feet flat on the floor, and she breathed the way her mother had taught her to breathe in difficult moments, steadily, from the bottom of the lungs, the way you breathe when you need everything you have. Kvaratz Helia called for a formal suspension of the hearing pending review of the new material. His voice was measured and procedurally precise, and underneath the procedure it was the voice of a man who intends to run this to ground and will not be moved. She gathered herself and walked out of the chamber into the corridor. Outside, and stood against the cool stone wall and let the stillness of it hold her for a moment. The Duke was in the corridor. She hadn't expected that. She had told him not to come. He had agreed and come anyway, which she discovered she was not able to be angry about when she saw his face, the controlled exterior of it, and underneath, visible to her now in a way it had not been 3 weeks ago. The cost of having waited outside while she carried something he had carried alone for 3 years, into a room he could not enter. She walked to where he was standing. She stopped in front of him. "It's done," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The high windows of the corridor let in the thin winter light, and it fell across his face and made him look entirely human, which she suspected he needed someone to see him as, and had not had for a very long time. "Yes," he said. She thought of everything that was still unresolved, the inquiry that had only just begun, the men who would now be managing their own considerable panic, her father's appointment, the shape of whatever came next. There was still a great deal of next, but the thing that had needed doing was done, and she was standing upright. And he was looking at her the way Tamar had described across a ballroom floor 3 weeks ago, like something he had stopped believing in. "What happens now?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the particular, careful honesty she had come to know as the truest thing about him, "I don't know exactly, but I'd like to find out with you, if you're willing." Outside the corridor windows, the city went about its business in the cold morning light, entirely unaware that something had shifted in a building at its centre. Something small and consequential at once, the way things that matter usually are. She looked at him. "I'm willing," she said. If you loved this story and want to see more, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for more thrilling adventures and updates. Your support truly means everything to me. And don't forget to drop a comment. Where are you watching from?